So today we are working on a slim pen with some driftwood that I found actually sunken down in the water. It was so waterlogged that it was sunken in a marsh. So I took it out and dried it up and let it sit for a couple months. And we have um, dried it out enough for it to be hard enough to turn and not so soggy. It's not going to stick to the glue. So I made up the blank here. I will probably show you how to put it in a blank some other time, but it's basically drill a hole, stick the tubes in, and uh, you're left with the two blocks you see there. And so we've got that together with our showing the fittings and what order they're all going to go in, and just going to be turning that today. But next we have the bushings here in this photo showing where we're going to put them on the lathe, and they will be on the end of each of these blocks so that it will help us set the perfect size so that once fully turned, those fittings are going to be the same size as the tip and that middle ring and the end cap if you're looking at it from left to right. So next we are going to get that put on the lathe in that order. And on this particular pen, it doesn't matter which uh, block it gets used for the top or the bottom, so I may end up mixing that top and bottom block. And won't matter since all those bushings are the same size. So we are on the lathe and ready to turn. I usually put this at the highest speed on my lathe, which I don't know the exact RPM, but it's fast enough for me to turn a small diameter blank, which is important because the bigger you get, the more distance you're covering per revolution, and the more torque your tool puts on the working piece. So here we're just roughing it, getting the pieces to be circular, and you can hear that buzzing noise. That is because it's not a perfect circle, it's a lot more. It hits that tool every time it goes around, just makes that buzzing noise. So I like to use this square tool to work off that corner and kind of shave off a little bit at a time. This driftwood is not all that dense of a wood, so here I'm doing okay shaving off little bits at a time, but it's a very it will probably get to be um, might shred a little more easily because of the softness of it, and it looks nice and clean now, but partly because I'm using the square tool and it's cutting cleanly and it's a sharp square bit. So we can see that it's gotten pretty round and I got it to a generally rough shape. So this bottle that I'm sprinkling on here is actually super glue, and I use this thin, which is pretty watery, this thin super glue to put it on, and it soaks into the wood and hardens and actually makes it nice and crispy so that it becomes hard, easier to turn. And what I was spraying there's uh, it's an accelerator that helps that super glue dry faster. Probably hear me refer to the super glue as CA glue, which stands for cyanoacrylate glue. And it smells just as terrible and is a little bit unpleasant if you breathe it in, or very unpleasant, but um, you can see my giant mask thing I'm wearing there that is um, protects from shavings flying out, and if I get too thin, it will also protect from flying pen chunks. But I switched to using a circular tool here to get nice and close to those bushings to get the size close, because it's also a nicer tool for getting some softer curves when you are roughing like this. Um, so right here we're kind of cleaning up and getting closer to the bushing right there. It's a whole lot easier to get closer to the bushing with uh, a tool than it is a sandpaper. So I'm putting some more CA on here to keep the material nice and crisp and keep it from shredding. You can actually watch it soak in as the lighter the material is, the more you'll see that CA soak in. And that gives it some structure. And it'll also actually be what we finish this with because it finishes to a high hardness. That foam there is actually what happens if you have a, it happens mostly with thin CA, but that foam is actually hardened. You'll see those little chunks fly out. That's just the CA hardening so fast that the bubbles in it are causing that foaming. And there it's coming off. Comes off nice and easy. Not easy to sand on, but it is pretty easy to tool on. So just a little more tooling here. Using this carbide tool to shave off a little layer at a time. The reason I'm doing glue, and it does look like the glue is coming off in between the layers every time I retool. So I do a layer like this and put a little bit more on and then shave it off with my tool. And I'm doing that because if I don't add this CA and let it soak in, the tool will um, pull the, it will come off of the blank with in chunks, and it will sometimes tear away more than I want it to. So every time I put a little more CA on it, it creates a cleaner cut. And as it soaks in, every time I do a little bit of another CA layer, if I don't shave it all off, there's a little steam coming off of the reaction there, and that stuff acts so fast. I put my finger on it, but when the CA soaks in, it creates a layer beneath what I'm shaving off. I usually shave off most of that, but towards the final bits, it will create a good base within the blank material. The softer the material, like I've done some leather and cloth and other uh, less dense natural materials that end up putting a lot of CA glue into. Is it like fabric? If I just was to try and turn fabric, it would just turn to fuzz. But if I can harden it with CA, that makes it something I can tool off with this carbide tool. Uh, I'm getting pretty close here to the final stages, and sometimes you can tool all the way to the last second, and you don't have to do a whole lot of sanding and roughing. Touching it a little there, like I do, is not dangerous on something this small, provided you don't touch it too add too much pressure, but I just wanted to see if it was still round and not rough. So I'm ready to sand, and I'm starting with a 120 grit here. This will leave, if you do it too harshly, it will leave sanding marks. So that's why we work our way up in in grits. But these sanding strips, they get they can get clogged, and that's why I tend to go through a lot of sandpaper. And you're just comment on here and say, why don't I use mesh? Mesh is not nearly as effective, at least for me. The grit that's in this sandpaper grabs a whole lot more and a whole lot faster than a mesh paper does. And there's probably all sorts of other techniques for smoothing like this, but this works for me, and it's not all that expensive, and I can do it precisely and pretty smoothly. So looks like I'm I pull out some more CA, and since I've gotten a little bit, well, a whole lot closer to the final shape, the CA glue is going to soak in and not only add more structure to the inner layers there, it'll also fill in all the pores, keeping it from cracking later on. And so here I've got full CA layer on and a little bit of closer view so you can see the finishing and um, how that CA is going to harden, give us a little bit of polish. So got a nice even layer. That was to check the camera, make sure I don't get any CA on the camera. That'll fling off sometimes if you're not careful. Part of the reason why I use a full face mask. So there was enough CA on there. I didn't want to um, leave it in bubbles or leave an uneven surface on the wood. So it will, so that when I sand it, I won't end up with areas that are still covered in CA and some that's just wood. Because then I'll have to glue or recover that in the CA glue. And I think I'm pretty much sanding most of that off, but at least I'm soaked in a little bit more. Even if I sand off all that CA, it's good to know that I have a good solid hard layer, and if I don't sand enough, I will be left with a decent layer of CA to base my finish on and give some structure to that wood. So, sanding a little bit. I believe we are on to 240 grit, and now we're up to 360. So as you're getting further up into the grits, the bushings will get a little bit of sand. They'll get sanded a little bit, and uh, that's perfectly fine. As long as you're not doing a light colored wood and the sandpaper doesn't bring some of that metal into the light colored wood, it's no problem, but you may want to watch out for that if you're working with a light wood. This one's no concern. If you've made a whole bunch of pens on the same set of bushings, they may end up getting a little bit smaller, so you may end up wanting to do another set of bushings for that particular pen. Just pay attention when you put it together, and you'll be able to watch out for that. So here I put a little bit of oil on a paper towel. Thank you, Jeff. That was a nice tip. It helps when you're applying the CA. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of thin on here. And it does go flying a little bit. And you can see that as soon as I touched it with the oiled paper towel, it instantly got smooth. And this works great to smooth it out, but it does get some of the oil mixed in with the CA as it goes into the wood. So it doesn't penetrate the same way, it doesn't adhere as well, but it does very well for putting, if you want to put a whole bunch of layers on there, use that little bit of paper towel with oil on it, you'll get a good look of how the finished wood's going to look. And so that was that wood I was checking out there. Resanding a little bit to smooth out that outermost layer of CA. That layer of CA that I did was probably gonna, I did that so that it could soak into the wood, and it was mostly for structure, not for finish. So now we're, once we add this next layer here, we'll have a good base layer of the CA. Again, that CA that's not on the surface, that's just below the surface, it's making the outside of that pen harder so that once we add multiple layers of that CA finish, it will build up to something that's not going to dent and certainly won't be as soft as the original piece of driftwood was. I could almost squish that with my fingers, but this should end up being quite a bit better. I think we're on 600 grit. We're going to do a little more of the same CA and paper towel. Plenty of oil left over from before. Wood is funny in how it it changes color as soon as it gets wet. It's it does turn nice and dark. It stays dark when it gets wet, and water and finishes and stains, and well, maybe not so much stains, but the finishes that give the wood a finished appearance makes it look so much more beautiful. So here I am making sure that all the oil is off after I'd applied that CA. And it's nice and smooth and not wet, because the next step here is this is a little bit of medium CA. So what this does is it will still soak in, but it's a little thicker, like kind of like warm maple syrup. And it will, I'm going to get it on there, just roughly covering the surface. And after I do this, I'm going to smooth it out a little bit, just enough to leave it on there, but not so much that it takes it off, because it hasn't soaked in as much, because it's not quite as thick as the thin CA. So I'll let it, apparently I'm not going to let it sit. Adding the oil on the paper towel there gets it smooth, and it's filled in enough and hard enough where it's not going to make my finger stick to it. So here is some micro mesh sandpaper. And these micro mesh pads are kind of stiff. It's got a foam middle layer and they're double-sided. They go from 1500, the first one is a 1500, and they go all the way up to 12,000. And I go every step of this sanding process on these micro mesh, no matter how useless it seems. It gets the little wrinkles and little waves out that the CA left behind, and it is quite a jump from the 600 that was on those rough 600 grit that was on those rough sandpaper strips I had to the 1500. But the reason it doesn't matter as much is because we filled a lot of those scrapes and drops left behind from the grit of those strips to those have gotten filled in with the CA glue, that medium. It's another good reason to add that medium zip. So some of this white residue that's left behind here is a little bit of dust, a little bit of CA, a little bit of residue coming off of the micro mesh pads there. And when it's all finished, it will still probably look white, but that will come out with some of the oil that we put on it, and the oil from your hands when you're using the pen, and that cleans it out. A lot of the pores in wood will get filled with the oil and again bring back that wet beauty type look. So this is a coarser grit, oily product called Yorkshire Grit that I use. It's the first thing I'll use after I've done the micro mesh, and I believe it is actually a rougher grit than the 12,000 grit micro mesh that I finished with, but it gets a little bit of oil in there, and it doesn't take down the sheen so much that it's a concern. You can see it's plenty shiny, and oil is certainly helping with that. So it doesn't so much come off with my finger, but as I rub the paper towel on it, you can see that it is still a nice clean glossy finish even after any residue of that Yorkshire Grit oily material has come off. It's still good and shiny. And that would be that CA finish. So yes, finished with super glue, believe it or not. So here we have all the parts put in order, just kind of in assembly mode, so we know what's going where. On the left most part we have the tip, that's where the little, the inky part will come out. And the dark wood blank there that we just finished. And then the little silver circle is the ring that will go between the two halves. And then the cylinder that's got the brass on one end and the silver color on the other end, that is going to go just inside the blank on the left, about a quarter inch. And that's the mechanism that moves the pen up and down. So you can put it in your pocket and know that it's not going to write on anything. And then we have the other half of the blank on the kind of towards the back there. And then the silver, the long pen clip, and the little end button that is going to be what holds the clip on and gives that end of the tube a finished look. And then, of course, the pen blank ink refill on the bottom there. So we have pressed the tip in. That is the first piece I put in on a slim kit. And then I took the end cap on the other blank piece and put the clip on it, make sure that goes the right way, and then press that into the end of the blank. And I used to use just a plain old vise for this, since a vise is big enough to grip each of these 2-inch-ish blank pieces and press them together. But thanks to my friend Dale, I got an arbor press that is, I just put it on the bench and you can put these pieces in and have a little bit more precision and no worries of crushing the pen. So the cylinder mechanism I put into the lower blank half, and there's a little perforated line on that twist mechanism that is kind of your stopping point for the cylinder to get pushed into the blank. And if you're a little concerned about getting it in the right spot, I always put it in most of the way, and then I screw the cross style refill there into the twist mechanism just to make sure it comes out just the right amount. And some people might like it sticking out a little further, but uh, if you don't, then I don't know how you write the pen that way, but it's up to you. This is one of the pens that has some flexibility there. So that is handy. At this point, we are at the end of what we need tools for to assemble the parts on here, so everything here can be done by hand. So this is a cross-style refill for these slim pens, which means that twist mechanism has a little bit of a thread on the black plastic piece you can see. And so when you insert the tip of the pen into the mechanism down towards the tip of the pen, the last 1/8 inch or so, you'll actually screw the refill on there. And if you ever need to refill this pen, you can actually pull the cap off and it will look like this with that ring on there. And you can unscrew that refill and put a new one in, screw it back in. So here we barely have anything different. That little ring just had to get put on, slide it on right over the twist mechanism. Not too hard, there's a little bit of pressure around the wide part of that mechanism. So there is our starting point. That is the other half of the piece of driftwood that I worked off of, and then a finished assembled pen. So there is your 101 on how to make a pen with a piece of not so dense driftwood using a lot of CA and getting it all finished up into a platinum slim style pen kit. And keep it, give it away, sell it, it's up to you. So there is your basic rundown for a slim pen. Hope you learned something. Send it to a friend if they're wanting to get into turning, or if they just need a little bit of advice on how to put a pen together, or save it in case you're wondering which way the fittings go, because it certainly took me a while to remember which way is what.